When Bartolomé de las Casas arrived at the island of Hispaniola in 1502, he witnessed a genocide in progress. It's hard to overstate the level of death and destruction before him, and at first, he just went along with it. But today, he's revered, and he's immortalized as a hero, as in this painting here by Félix Parra. And that's because de las Casas made a total 180 in his life. He reached a breaking point, and he would spend 5 decades relentlessly trying to stop the horrors of the Spanish conquest of the New World. And for his trouble, he was loathed by almost everyone. He was shot at, he had his allies murdered, and he was even prosecuted by his enemies for supposed treason. But that didn't stop him from writing about his experiences and trying to convince his contemporaries that what they were doing was an abomination. And the books that he wrote have served as an inspiration for hundreds of years since, and are very valuable first-person historical documentation. So Bartolomé de las Casas was a Catholic friar, basically serving as a chaplain to the men who were conducting slave raids against the Taino, who were the indigenous people living on the island of Hispaniola. For his participation in this, he was awarded slaves and land of his own. When he arrived in Hispaniola, he was a young man traveling with his father, and it was long before this island would become the countries of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. De las Casas recorded that the Taino had a huge, thriving population, estimating that this island and the others in the Antilles island chain were occupied by millions of people. The Taino had probably been there since around 900 AD, and you don't hear about them much today because they were wiped out by the arrival of the Spanish. Now, the real number of their population might have been a bit lower, but they were definitely a long-established culture and people that were living here for centuries. And they were very famously a very peaceful and cooperative bunch, which kind of excited the opportunistic and sadistic Spaniards like Columbus, who saw them as easy pickings. Now, once de las Casas arrives, he starts documenting details about the island and the Taino. And although it had only been a decade since the Spanish had been there, the Taino were already disappearing very quickly. This is mostly because of the diseases that had been brought along with the Europeans, but it was aided by mass killings, starvation, and brutal working conditions. De las Casas' account of these times are honestly a pretty tough read, even for someone like me who spends a lot of time reading books about grim subjects. His most famous book, a short account of the destruction of the Indies, goes over the atrocities he saw on each of the islands that he visited. And I'll give you a little taste of his description of Hispaniola. He wrote, quote, "They sent the males to work in the mines and dig and bring away gold, which is an intolerable labor. But the women they made use of to manure and till the ground, which is a toil most irksome even to men of the strongest and most robust constitution." So this was the existence of the people on the receiving end of the Spanish conquest, and it was very normal in this context. But de las Casas seemed to have been struggling with accepting this brutality. He comes and goes from the island back to Spain and continues his religious education. And then in 1513, he goes on an expedition into Cuba, and he reaches a breaking point. He wrote about the expedition, quote, "I saw here cruelty on a scale no living being has ever seen or expects to see," end quote. And this experience pushes him over the edge, and he decides to renounce the entire system. He gives up his land, his slaves, and he demands that his peers do the same. And when they don't, he goes back to Spain to petition the aristocratic class to intervene. And that became his life's mission. And until his death in 1566, he would travel the Americas and Europe to try to reduce or eliminate needless violence and try to encourage peaceful coexistence. He would lose everything he knew in the process, but he couldn't go on with his life knowing that this kind of thing was happening. Now today, we might think that we would have done the same, that we would have seen this exploitation as it was and done something. But how much of that is our 21st century morality superimposed onto a situation 500 years ago? De las Casas' story stands out in history precisely because it's unusual. The Spanish, and really the Europeans more broadly, had a much different conception of what could be done in the name of nobility and religion, and obviously had a much higher tolerance of violence than what we can compare with today. And for as horrible as all this was, what it paved the way for might have actually been worse, because when the Taino were wiped away, the colonizers of the New World had a vast vacuum of labor that needed to be filled, and their solution was importing millions of slaves from Africa. So with all of that in mind, let's return to Félix Parra's painting, which was made in 1875. By then, the Spanish Empire was coming apart, and within living memory, they had been ousted from their colonial holdings in the Americas. Parra and the relatively newly independent Mexican people had to reconcile their past and forge an identity for themselves going forward. and Parra's artistic answer for this problem was paintings like this one. The destruction of an ancient civilization, the weeping of the survivors, and the contempt of the people, powerless to stand in its way, like Bartolomé de las Casas. Parra would be famous for painting themes of change in Mexican history, and his life's work would inspire the next generation of even more famous painters like Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo. And yes, this whole episode in human history makes me ashamed of what our species is capable of. But I think there are two important things to remember here. One, that this is not a Spanish thing. This is a side of human beings that we can easily forget about in our modern world. The experience of the Taino is extreme, but it is not atypical when you zoom out and consider how other civilizations have treated those that they could exploit. The Romans to the Gauls, the Mongols to the Chinese, the Assyrians to the Babylonians. And two, that people like de las Casas have always existed, which showed that human behavior is a wide spectrum, and that it is in us to behave in a way that is celebrated by our ancestors, in ways that we can't really understand at the time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you did, it'd be really great if you could like and subscribe. I hope to see you next time. Bye.